Civilizations that never met each other, all told the exact same story. A great flood. One man warned by a god, a boat, animals. The waters rise, everything dies. Then it recedes. Humanity survives. The Sumerians wrote it 4,000 years ago, 1,000 years before the Bible. The Hindus had it. The Greeks had it. The Aztecs had it. Aboriginal Australians had it. Native Americans across an entire continent had it. No ships connected them. No trade routes. No shared language. Nothing. And yet, the same story. Word for word. But it's not just the flood. The sun god. The underworld. The trickster. The god who dies and comes back to life. The great serpent. Every single one of these appears independently, in cultures separated by entire oceans, as if someone handed them a script. Nobody handed them a script. So what is actually going on? There are 4 explanations. I need you to stay until the 4th one, because it will change how you think about what you are. The first explanation is the most grounded, and the most unsettling for a completely different reason. Maybe the flood story is the same everywhere because the flood actually happened everywhere. 12,000 years ago, the last ice age ended. Glaciers melted. Sea levels rose by over 100 meters over several thousand years. Entire coastlines disappeared. Civilizations built on shores, gone. Permanently. The Black Sea is the most dramatic example. It used to be a freshwater lake, sitting quietly above sea level. Then, around 7,500 years ago, rising Mediterranean waters broke through a thin land barrier and flooded it. At 200 times the force of Niagara Falls, people lived on those shores. Some of them survived by running uphill. They watched their entire world, their homes, their fields, their dead, disappear underwater in a matter of weeks. And they told that story every night. They made their children memorize it. Their children told their children, 300 generations, by mouth, no writing, before anyone carved it into stone. The flood myth might be the oldest eyewitness account in human history. But that only explains the flood. It doesn't explain why the Egyptians and the Aztecs and the Vikings all independently decided the sun needed a god. It doesn't explain why every culture on Earth, without a single exception, built an underworld. For that, you need the second explanation, and it's going to require you to think about your own brain differently. In the early 20th century, Carl Jung noticed something that nobody had properly named before. He was studying myths from cultures that had never made contact, and the same figures kept showing up, not similar figures, the same ones. The hero who descends into darkness and returns transformed. The trickster who breaks the rules everyone else follows. The great mother, the shadow, the wise old man. Jung called them archetypes. And his argument was this: these figures don't come from culture. They come from biology. Every human brain, regardless of where it's born, shares the same basic fears, the same experiences: birth, hunger, love, loss, death, the same sky above it, the same sun that saves it from darkness every single morning. When you live in a world with no science, no physics, no chemistry, no meteorology, and the sun rises every day without fail, you don't think coincidence. You think intention. You think presence. You think something is doing that, and something that powerful, that reliable, that life-giving. Of course it's a god. Not because anyone told you, because your eyes told you. Death is universal and terrifying. Of course, every culture builds an underworld. The alternative, that the dead simply stop, that they vanish into nothing, is too enormous to sit with. So the mind builds a somewhere. Every mind, every time. Jung's conclusion was radical. We didn't invent the same myths. We secreted them. The way a body secretes hormones. Automatically, inevitably, because that's what this kind of organism does. But Jung was a psychologist. The third explanation comes from evolutionary biology, and it's darker. Your brain has a system it cannot turn off, and that system accidentally invented religion. Pascal Boyer, an anthropologist who spent decades on this question, calls it agent detection. And here's how it works. On the African savanna, your ancestors faced a simple problem. When something moves, is it dangerous? The brain evolved a shortcut. Assume agency. Assume something is causing it. Assume intention. A bush rustles. Is it wind? Is it a predator? If you assume wind and you're wrong, you're dead. If you assume predator and you're wrong, you wasted 2 seconds of fear. The cost of one mistake is death. The cost of the other is nothing. So, the brain evolved to fire the agency alarm constantly, aggressively, even when nothing is there. And here is the problem. It never learned to only fire for animals. So, it fires for storms, for earthquakes, for droughts, for the sun, for death itself. The brain asks the same question it always asks. Who is doing that? Who is in charge of that? Who is angry? And the moment a natural force has a who behind it, you have a god with intentions, a god that might be persuaded, which means prayer makes sense, ritual makes sense, sacrifice makes sense. The gods of every civilization on Earth may be an accidental byproduct of a survival mechanism that evolved for spotting leopards. A glitch that built cathedrals. Now. The fourth explanation. This one doesn't come from psychology or biology. It comes from genetics. And what it suggests is something most people are not prepared to hear. What if we never actually forgot? Humanity left Africa roughly 70,000 years ago. We didn't leave all at once. We spread slowly, in small groups, across connected land that no longer exists. Over tens of thousands of years, we walked to every corner of the earth, and we carried things with us: fire, tools, language, and stories. A researcher named Julien de Huy took the same analytical method used to trace the evolution of species, phylogenetic analysis, and applied it to world mythology. He mapped how myths change across cultures the same way biologists map how genes change across populations. His findings: certain myths share a common ancestor more than 100,000 years old, older than the migration out of Africa, older than the split between the peoples of every continent, older than almost everything we call human civilization, which means the flood story, the dying god, the great serpent. These weren't invented independently by separate cultures. They were carried, in human memory, across 100,000 years of telling. We didn't come up with the same stories because we think alike. We came up with the same stories because they are the same stories, the original ones, the ones our common ancestors told, before we were separate peoples at all. The myths aren't parallel, they're echoes. So which explanation is right? Probably all of them, working together, at different times, in different places, for different myths, real floods, preserved in human memory for 10,000 years. Shared brain architecture producing the same symbols independently, an agent detection system misfiring at the sky, and stories older than civilization itself, carried across the world in the mouths of our ancestors. But step back from the explanations for a moment. Every culture that has ever existed, every single one, without exception, without coordination, looked at the same universe and wrapped it in a story. Built gods to explain it, built rituals to manage it, built myths to make it livable. That's not a coincidence of ideas. That's a feature of the species. We are not the animal that thinks. We are not the animal that uses tools. Every definition we've tried eventually gets complicated by some other creature doing a version of the same thing. But no other animal has ever built a myth. No other animal has ever looked at the darkness and asked, "Who's there?" Only us. Every time. Everywhere. The gods are different. The stories on the surface are different. But the question underneath all of them is always the same question, and we are still asking it. If something just shifted in how you see things, good. That's the point. Hmmward. New questions every week. Subscribe, because the next one goes even deeper.